So for one of the articles I did for my blog on WF Tutorials, I wrote one called "These 5 Concepts Will Speed Up Your Web Development." So we're just going to look at what those 5 concepts are and how they could help you in your web development. So the first one is break up big problems into small ones. So let's see how to describe this. Big problems. It's easier to work with smaller problems. If you try to tackle a project head on and try to do everything at the same time, you get into much difficulty. So one of the best ways to handle this is to learn to tackle big problems by breaking it up into small problems. And then what you do is you work on each of those small problems one time after the other. It also ensures you don't feel overwhelmed with the amount of work that you have to do, and it allows you to manage your time more effectively, and you can figure out what needs to be done next better. So yeah, break big problems into small problems. This helps also when you're building algorithms to manage complex processes. You most likely won't know the solution or won't know how to build a solution from the get-go. So what you do is you start with a very small part and you take it from there and you move forward. You build step by step until you have the entire solution completed. So as you can see in the example here, we have big problem and then smaller problems. So the smaller problems will, will help you solving these smaller problems one at a time. Will ensure that the big problem gets completed. The next one is design first, execute after. You don't want to rush into things. You want to think as much as possible. I mean, once you say that, you get in the possibility that you could be overthinking, but you want to give the thing you're about to build some thought first. With some thought, what could go wrong, what could go right, what might happen in the future, what errors might occur, what security holes there are, what the user might enter wrong, what the user might enter right, what the user would like to see, how it would make their life easier. Just think about everything as much as possible and then design or map your way forward. And you're doing all of this before you actually start to code. Not one line of code should be written as yet. Right now you're just thinking through the process to see how you're going to proceed with this task that you have. This way, a few things happen, and off the top of my head, one is you already know what you're going to do when you start coding. So you don't start coding and then you stop and think about what you're going to do. You already know what you're going to do. So once you start, you can just keep going. Of course, you'll encounter problems and you'll have to deal with those problems that you didn't think about. But because you were better prepared, you'd be more suited or capable to handle the problems that occur. Because as it turns out, planning is very effective, and having a plan is almost always better than not having a plan. Things don't ever go to as planned, but just having a plan tends to benefit you better than winging it, at least in programming. So have a plan and stick to a plan as much as possible, but have a plan. Ooh, live. Alright. So the executed plan is never what you really plan, but the plan, it's still, and almost always is still within the scope of what you plan. So make sure you have a plan. Understand the problem. Understand the problem you're trying to solve. Alright. I think this factors into the second one, which is design phase. You wanna know what you're about to solve. As obvious that as that may seem, it isn't always done. I mean, as a programmer or developer, you might assume you know enough to get started, but you wanna become but that might not give you enough knowledge to deal with the ins and outs of what you're about to deal with. So you want to take some time to get fully acquainted with the problem at hand. So how do you do this? Research, asking questions, holding meetings. Pretty straightforward stuff. Whatever gets you the knowledge you need to correctly understand the problem. So only after you correctly understand the problem can you develop a solution. Remember, the solution isn't what you think is correct, is what would help the client or customer best. So that is what you need to create. Not your vision of what needs to be done, but what actually needs to be done. You need to find out that what is actually required and deliver. Ignore the unnecessary details until you need them. This is a very effective solution, although I don't think everybody can do it. It doesn't come naturally to everyone. But as much as you want to understand the problem and get all the information you need, there's a balance in all of that. And the balance says, to some extent, you should ignore some of the details that you don't need to know. That would help you to get up and running much faster. So that's kind of practical. So yes, you need to understand the problem, but at the same time you can't understand the problem too much. So use it as you see fit. But sometimes you really want to get started as soon as possible and you don't want to get bogged down with details. Depending on your skill and how much you understand your skill, you will be able to see what is unnecessary details and what you need to know. There's a very big difference between the two. I don't want to give an exact example. I'm assuming I'd be incorrect from the get-go. But it comes across like this. Because you are designing the project, you know what you could actually know. Some things are dealt with at a high level from a design perspective, so that the nitty-gritty is already handled after it's developed or can be easily implemented. So those are the kinds of things you would have to ignore, things that at a high level you can manage without needing to know the intricate details, because you know that one, either they'll take care of themselves through the design process, or you could always implement them afterwards. And when I say implement afterwards, I mean with a degree of ease, which is why you don't need to consider it right now, because the process to actually implement it is pretty straightforward. So it's pretty subjective. It's up to you to decide how to use it and how effective it would be, but it would speed up your development time. Work with the tools you are most familiar with. Well, this may seem obvious to everybody, or maybe it isn't. You should work with what you're most familiar with. This is a definite must, especially when there are time constraints. I mean, it's not always possible. There's so many scenarios where this is not an option, but as long as it is an option, you should work with what you're most familiar with. In one of my earlier videos, I showed how I was building a React project. The app I actually built is pretty simple to do, and React implements is very cool. Well, with my home language, one of the languages I'm most familiar with, I would have had it done up and running in way less time. It would have been as clean, and the ability to modify it afterwards wouldn't have been as perfect, because React is kind of structured to allow me to build that. But I would have gotten it done, and that is often the main concern, that the things that need to get done. So don't stuff in your free time. But if you need to do something, do it in the language you're most familiar with. I think this, to me, is a no-brainer. You should almost never have to ask the question what framework or stack to use. Just use what you're most comfortable with. Use what you think would get the job done. It is almost irrelevant at this point. Find something good, make it work. The solution is most effective. Afterwards, you could play with technologies, but not before you actually build something. Just no pause. Do one thing at a time. Alright, so that's the last one. Do one thing at a time. So this is just about focus. You don't want to be so So this is just about focus. And it's also about one of the first ones where I said you should break up big problems into smaller problems. It's kind of the same thing. You focus on one thing and you get it done, and then you move on to the next thing, and then you move on to the next thing. Doing one or two things at the same time. The effectiveness of multitasking is highly subjective, at least I think. You want to focus on one thing and get it done, and let that motivation from doing that one thing push you on to move to the next thing. Break your tasks into smaller tasks and complete them one by one. It's also a good way to track your progress, and it really gets you motivated, because once you finish one thing, if you have energy to finish something else just by finishing that one thing, as opposed to having so many things on your plate, you feel like you're getting nowhere, which is one of the feelings that happen when you multitask. and attempting to do too many things at the same time. Frankly, you can multitask, but even if you're multitasking, you'll be doing it like that way, which is you'd have 15 things to do that in theory supposed to be completed at the same time, but you'll be spent sufficient time on each of those 15 things so as right, you'll be spending sufficient time on those 15 things so as to get at least, let's say you had 15 days to do 15 things, you spend 1 day on one thing. And if you can't finish that thing within the 1 day, you move on to the next thing and hopefully you get the other thing done. So at the end of the 15 days, you either should have finished 15 things or 14 things, or as much as possible. But you shouldn't have all 15 things still be pending. That is ridiculous. So focus on one thing. Get as much as possible done within the time frame you set, and then move on to the next thing, if you have to multitask. Otherwise, just have one thing on your plate and get that done. I'm gonna stop here for today.